Hey, yeah, I'm talking to you. Imagine we're sitting side by side, maybe in a car or on a couch, and I lean over and say this quietly. Most men don't lose relationships because they're bad men. They lose themselves because they ignore the warning signs right in front of them, not red flags that scream, but small sentences that sound harmless, until they aren't. Here's the controversial truth no one prepares men for. Attraction alone is not enough. Chemistry is not a contract. And love does not require you to tolerate behavior that slowly erodes your self-respect. A lot of men stay far too long, not because they're weak, but because they were taught to endure, to man up, to give more, and to stay silent when something feels off. This video is not about hating women. Let me be very clear about that. There are incredible women in the world. This is about patterns, not people. It's about specific things a woman might say, not once in a bad mood, but consistently, that signal a relationship is moving in a direction that will cost you your peace, your confidence, and your future. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Many of these phrases are socially normalized. Your friends might brush them off. Movies might romanticize them. Even you might excuse them because she's just being honest. But honesty without respect is not intimacy. It's a warning. I'm speaking to men who want healthy, calm, mutually respectful relationships. Men who don't want to be controlled, guilted, or slowly trained to doubt themselves. Men who want partnership, not probation. Throughout this video, I'm going to break down 5 specific statements that, when said seriously and repeatedly, should make you pause and seriously reconsider the relationship. Not out of anger, not out of drama, but out of self-respect. You don't need to argue. You don't need to diagnose her. And you definitely don't need to fix anyone. Sometimes the strongest move a man can make is knowing when to step away. If you've ever felt confused, drained, or quietly anxious in a relationship and couldn't explain why, this is for you. Listen closely. These words matter more than you think. 1. I'm just like this. You knew what you signed up for. Let me stop you right here, because if a woman ever looks at you calmly and says this sentence, you need to lean back and really listen. Not with your feelings, not with hope, but with logic. I'm just like this. You knew what you signed up for. That sentence sounds honest. It sounds confident. It even sounds mature. But underneath it, there's a message most men miss. Here's the hook you need to hear. Growth never says, deal with it. Only stagnation does. When someone uses this phrase, what they're really saying is, I am not interested in adjusting, improving, or meeting you halfway, and I want you to stop asking. That's not confidence. That's resistance to accountability. Now let's be clear. Everyone has a personality. Everyone has flaws. That's normal. The problem is not having flaws. The problem is defending them as permanent. Healthy adults don't freeze themselves in time and demand unconditional acceptance of behavior that hurts others. Notice how this phrase usually shows up. It's rarely said after something small. It comes out after disrespect, emotional distance, lack of effort, or repeated behavior that bothers you. You finally speak up, calmly, reasonably, and instead of curiosity or reflection, you get a shutdown. This is where many men make a mistake. They hear this and think, okay, I guess I just have to be more patient. No, patience is for growth. Patience is not for avoidance. Another uncomfortable truth, this phrase quietly shifts responsibility onto you. The unspoken message is, if you're unhappy, that's your problem, not mine. And over time, this trains you to stop expressing needs. You start editing yourself. You start minimizing what you feel. That's how resentment builds silently. And here's the controversial part most people won't say out loud. A relationship where only one person is expected to adapt is not a partnership. It's a power imbalance. Ask yourself this simple question. If roles were reversed, would you be allowed to say, that's just how I am, and shut down the conversation? Or would you be expected to change? Men who stay in this dynamic often don't realize what's happening until much later. They feel tired, less confident, less expressive. Not because they're weak, but because they're slowly learning that their voice doesn't matter. This isn't about perfection. It's about willingness. A woman who cares about you doesn't say, that's just how I am. She says, help me understand, or I'll try, or even, I don't know how yet, but I hear you. Those responses signal safety. The other one signals a wall. So here's the lesson. When someone tells you they won't grow, believe them. Not angrily, not dramatically, just honestly. You are not obligated to stay where effort is one-sided. Self-respect sometimes looks like walking away, not because someone is bad, but because they've told you very clearly that this is as good as it gets. 2. If you loved me, you would do it. Let me say this the way I'd say it to a friend sitting right next to me. The fastest way to lose yourself in a relationship is to confuse love with obligation. And this sentence, if you loved me, you would do it, is one of the most dangerous ways that confusion shows up. Here's the hook you need to hear up front. Love is not proven by how much of yourself you give up. It's proven by mutual respect. On the surface, this phrase sounds emotional, even romantic. It sounds like vulnerability. But pay attention to what's really happening. The moment love is used as a measuring stick to pressure you, love stops being shared and starts being leveraged. This sentence almost never appears in healthy moments. It shows up when you hesitate, when you set a boundary, when you say you're uncomfortable, tired, or simply not ready. Instead of your concern being heard, the conversation flips into a test. Prove your love. And here's where men get trapped. Many men are taught that real love means sacrifice. So when they hear this, they don't ask, is this reasonable? They ask, how do I pass? That mindset is exactly what keeps this dynamic alive. Let's make this very clear and very simple. Someone who genuinely loves you does not need to coerce you to act against your values, limits, or well-being. Healthy love invites, it does not corner. Another important point, this phrase removes choice. If you say yes, it wasn't freely given. If you say no, you're labeled as unloving. That's not communication, that's emotional pressure. Over time, this trains you to say yes automatically, even when something feels wrong. And here's the controversial truth most people avoid. Love that must be constantly proven is never secure. Secure people don't need loyalty tests. They don't need ultimatums disguised as feelings. Notice how this phrase also avoids accountability. Instead of explaining why something matters or asking how you feel, it jumps straight to guilt. It skips understanding and goes straight to compliance. Men who stay in this pattern often feel a quiet anxiety. They're always wondering, am I doing enough? They start giving more, hoping one day the tests will stop, but they don't, because the issue was never your effort. It was the dynamic. Now, this doesn't mean couples don't compromise. Compromise is normal. The difference is consent. A healthy partner says, this is important to me, can we talk about it? An unhealthy dynamic says, if you loved me, you wouldn't question it. One builds connection, the other builds fear of disappointing. So here's the lesson every man needs to internalize. Love is not something you audition for. You are not on trial. You are allowed to have limits without having your feelings questioned. When love is real, your no doesn't threaten it. When it's not, your no becomes a problem. And that difference tells you everything you need to know. 3. All my exes were the problem. Let me talk to you like we're having a real, honest conversation, because this one sounds harmless until you've lived it. When a woman tells you, all my exes were the problem, it might feel reassuring at first. You might think, she's just had bad luck. I'll be different. That thought alone pulls a lot of men in. Here's the hook you need to hear clearly. Patterns don't disappear just because you believe in potential. When someone talks about every past relationship the same way, pay attention, not to the details, but to the consistency. Life doesn't hand one person nothing but villains. Relationships are shared experiences. When there's no ownership, no reflection, and no mention of personal growth, something important is missing. This isn't about judging someone's past. Everyone has one. The issue is the mindset being revealed. If every story ends with, I did nothing wrong, what you're really hearing is a refusal to self-examine. And without self-examination, change doesn't happen. Many men relate to this because they want to be the exception. They want to be the calm one, the patient one, the man who finally gets her. That instinct comes from good intentions, but it can also blind you. You start believing that effort alone can override accountability. Here's something relatable most men won't say out loud. When someone never sees their role in past failures, they usually won't see their role in future ones either. That means when problems arise, and they always do, the responsibility won't be shared. It will be redirected. Over time, this creates a familiar feeling. You start questioning yourself. You start replaying conversations. You start wondering how things turned into your fault when you were just trying to communicate. This doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly through repetition. Another thing to notice is emotional maturity. Growth sounds like awareness. It sounds like learning. It sounds like perspective. When that's absent, conflict becomes circular. The same issues reappear in different forms, with different people but the same conclusions. This point is uncomfortable, but important. Someone who has never learned from their past will unknowingly recreate it, not because they want to, but because nothing internally has changed. This doesn't mean you should interrogate someone or demand explanations. It means you listen, you observe, you notice whether there's humility or defensiveness, responsibility or blame, curiosity or certainty. Healthy people don't claim perfection. They acknowledge missteps. They recognize patterns. They talk about what they've learned, not just what they've endured. So here's the takeaway, man to man. You are not meant to carry the weight of someone else's unresolved history. You can care deeply and still choose not to participate in cycles that don't lead anywhere new. When someone tells you they've never been part of the problem, believe them, but understand what that means for the future you're stepping into. 4. You're too sensitive, you're overreacting. Let me say this calmly, because this part isn't about attacking anyone. It's about waking up. When you hear the words, you're too sensitive or you're overreacting, it's easy to brush them off. Many men do. In fact, most men are taught to. You're told to be tougher, quieter, less emotional. So when this phrase shows up, you often assume the problem is you. Here's the hook you need to sit with. Being calm does not mean being numb, and being a man does not mean ignoring your internal signals. Now here's where the criticism comes in, and it's said with respect. A lot of men allow this phrase to work on them because they already doubt their right to speak up. Instead of standing on how they feel, they retreat. They tell themselves they're being dramatic. They swallow discomfort to keep the peace. That's not strength, that's self-abandonment. This phrase does something very subtle. It doesn't address what you said. It doesn't engage with your concern. It reframes the issue as your emotional reaction rather than the situation itself. Over time, that teaches you one thing. Don't talk about what bothers you. If this happens often enough, you stop trusting your instincts. You start asking for permission to feel. You become quieter, not because things are fine, but because you've learned that speaking up leads nowhere. Here's the uncomfortable truth men need to hear. If you consistently allow your feelings to be dismissed, you train others to dismiss them too. No one is coming to protect your boundaries for you. Now, calm advice, because this isn't about becoming aggressive or defensive. It's about awareness. When someone repeatedly minimizes how you feel, the issue isn't sensitivity, it's safety. Emotional safety means your experience is at least acknowledged, even if it's not fully agreed with. A healthy response sounds like understanding, not invalidation. Even disagreement can coexist with respect, but dismissal shuts the door entirely. This is where you need to wake up, not with anger, but with clarity. Your emotions are data, they're signals. Ignoring them doesn't make you rational, it makes you disconnected. Men who grow avoid two extremes, exploding or suppressing. They learn to speak plainly and calmly, and they notice who listens and who deflects. So here's the advice to take with you. Don't argue with someone who refuses to hear you. Observe instead. See how often your feelings are minimized. See whether there's curiosity or contempt. You don't need to prove you're not sensitive. You need to decide whether you're being respected. And once you see that difference clearly, your next move becomes obvious. 5. I don't need you. I'm doing you a favor. Let me say this in the most grounded, calm way possible, because this one cuts deeper than most men admit. When a woman says, I don't need you, or worse, I'm doing you a favor by being with you, it might be framed as independence or confidence. And independence is healthy. Confidence is attractive. But this sentence isn't about strength, it's about leverage. Here's the hook you need to hear clearly. Real independence doesn't require reminding someone how replaceable they are. At first, many men rationalize this. They tell themselves, she's just strong, or she doesn't want to seem needy. But pay attention to how it makes you feel. Not offended, just smaller, less secure, like your presence is optional, but your effort is expected. This phrase establishes a quiet hierarchy. It suggests that the relationship exists on her terms alone, that you're lucky to be there, that your value comes from being chosen, not from who you are. Over time, that message sinks in, even if you don't consciously agree with it. Here's what often happens next. You start overcompensating. You give more. You tolerate more. You hesitate to speak up because you don't want to be seen as expendable. That's not partnership. That's performance. Now, let's be clear and fair. No one should need someone to survive. That's not the point. The point is mutual appreciation. Healthy relationships aren't built on need, they're built on choice. And choice sounds like, I want you here, not I don't need you. The controversial truth most men don't want to face is this. When someone repeatedly emphasizes how little they need you, they are preparing you to accept being treated as disposable, not necessarily out of cruelty, but out of control. This is especially dangerous for men who already tie their worth to usefulness. If you believe your value comes from what you provide, this phrase quietly reinforces that insecurity. You start proving instead of connecting. Here's where calm awareness matters. A woman who respects you doesn't need to lower you to lift herself. She doesn't remind you of your replaceability during conflict. She doesn't frame the relationship as charity. Strength never needs to belittle. Confidence never needs to threaten, and love never needs to posture. Men who stay in this dynamic often feel an internal contradiction. They're present, but not appreciated, needed for effort, but not valued for presence. That contradiction drains you slowly. So here's the grounded lesson. A relationship should make you feel chosen, not tolerated, wanted, not tested, appreciated, not reminded of your expendability. This isn't about ego. It's about dignity. You don't need to demand reassurance. You simply observe how someone speaks to you when emotions are calm, not heated. If someone regularly frames themselves as doing you a favor, believe the signal, not the words. And remember this, you are not asking to be needed. You are asking to be valued. And if that feels like too much to ask in a relationship, then the relationship itself is already telling you what you need to know. The hard truth. Most men avoid. Here's the controversial statement I want to leave you with, and I want you to sit with it, not react to it. Most men don't stay in unhealthy relationships because they're in love. They stay because leaving would force them to finally choose themselves. That's not an insult, that's awareness. A lot of men tolerate things they would never advise their best friend to accept, not because they don't see the problem, but because walking away feels like failure, like wasted time, like admitting they ignored signs they now clearly recognize. So they stay, hoping things will slowly change without requiring a difficult decision. But here's the reality. No one spells out. Time does not fix dynamics. Clarity does. And clarity often arrives the moment you stop explaining your boundaries and start honoring them. If you noticed yourself nodding during this video, that's not coincidence. That's recognition. These phrases don't sound dramatic, they sound familiar, and familiarity is what makes them dangerous. You get used to them, you normalize them, until one day you realize your peace has been slowly negotiated away. This video wasn't about telling you to hate anyone. It wasn't about telling you to walk out at the first sign of conflict. It was about helping you recognize when communication turns into control, when honesty turns into dismissal, and when independence turns into leverage. Healthy relationships don't require you to shrink. They don't require constant proving. And they don't punish you for having boundaries. If you've experienced any of these phrases in your own life, I want you to do something simple but powerful. Comment your experience below. Not to complain, not to attack, just to share. Chances are another man reading it will realize he's not alone. I read the comments, and when I can, I reach out, because these conversations matter. Growth doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when men start being honest with themselves and with each other. Remember this moving forward. Peace is not boring, respect is not optional, and love should never cost you your self-worth. If this video gave you clarity, that's your signal. Don't ignore it.